what are the top things that they should be considering to make sure that they're not setting themselves up in a bad way when hiring people?
Man, that's the key to the kingdom, right? So, from my perspective, it's your hiring should start with culture and making sure that one, you have to do that, you have to have clarity about who you are as a company, and really what your culture, what defines your culture. And then as you start to interview, making sure that you're going to have fits within that. And that can be, everything from, and culture can mean so many things, but yes, we all got to get along. But do we share the same work ethic and work practices, right? And in these days, that now you're talking about, meeting someone as for an opening, and you're a company where you're all back in the office, or mainly back in the office, and you meet someone that wants fully hybrid. Well, that's not going to be a cultural fit, right? Even though they have the best skills potentially, because your culture is, we're in the office collaborating, working together, and you won't fit in, and you won't develop relationships. And I think it's being uh, very intentional about what works and the characteristics of successful people within your organization.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Brewing Business with Brady. Today's guest is Chris Hanslik of BoyarMiller. And today we are definitely going to be diving into some really important stuff in regards to legal topics. And granted, Chris can't give very detailed legal advice today, but some general legal guidance for many of our listeners that are in lower middle market businesses, construction, transportation, ag, et cetera. And really Chris's best insights. Chris is the chairman of BoyarMiller, and so a lot of tenured experience, and he's going to give his best insights as to considerations that business owners that have legal questions as to what they should be thinking about. So really grateful to have you on board today here, Chris. Really grateful to have you on the show. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Mason. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to the conversation.
We always like to kick off that, what's the drink that you start your day with?
So start my day with about 10 to 12 ounces of water with a little mineral salt in it,
Okay.
shaken, and before I go work out. Uh, but after the workout is when I grab my coffee.
Perfect. Perfect. Do you do anything special with the coffee?
Hazelnut latte.
Okay.
I've got a kind of an espresso machine at home. It's put the milk in the little thing, hit one button, it grinds the beans, and out comes a very nice latte. And I add a little hazelnut syrup to it, and one cup, and off to the races.
Awesome. Yeah. That in honor of BoyarMiller, I am gonna bust out your guys' mug for this episode today. So yeah, I'm repping the BoyarMiller mug instead of Brady CFO mug today.
That's huge. Well, thank you, because I know, given the name of your podcast, and I did receive your mug in the mail. Thank you. I love that you pulled that one out for us. So I just have a standard issue Boyer Miller coffee mug, and my also patented styrofoam cup of water.
There you go. Awesome.
So on ice.
Yep.
So
That blue though, I saw a class of 2025. What's that related to?
yeah, we've got a senior in high school
Okay.
here in Houston at Episcopal. They're the Knights, and so some
Perfect.
cups to commemorate the senior year.
Yeah, I was figuring I couldn't quite see everything, but I was like, class of 2025. It looked like the blue of SMU a little bit there when I was seeing it, and I know you're an SMU grad, so um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it was class of many years before 2025
yeah,
for
yeah,
me.
yep. I was wondering if you had a kid there or something. So good though. Well, yeah, we're gonna dive in a little bit, deeper here. That Chris, legal advice. It's one of those topics that certainly a lot of people don't get it until they really need it, right? But I think to any business owner, they should be considering, certain legal topics and certain legal parameters as they're building their business to be anticipatory of, hey, how do I make sure that I manage risk and I keep myself out of difficult situations? And I'm sure that you've probably experienced too often they're too deep into the problem, and you wish that they would have probably come and talked to you and your team a heck of a lot sooner in the process, right?
For sure.
Yes. So what's the number one thing you wish clients would call you about more often so they avoid getting in trouble? I'm sure that there's a lot, but like, what's the number one thing that you're like, I wish you would talk to me about this way sooner.
For sure. So yeah, you probably don't have enough time to go through all that, but it really starts at the. I think the best way to answer that, if the number one on the list would be starting at the beginning. That as you're thinking of and forming a company, get your organizational documents done right, uh, especially if you have partners, right? If there's more than one, and as we all know, when you're starting out as an entrepreneur in business, you're counting pennies, right? You're holding on to cash. And so what we see so often is people think of, well, I don't, I need to spend the money everywhere else but legal. So, don't need to worry about it, or we'll get to it later, or we'll do online legal Zoom or something. And what I tell people is, if you can, rather than think about this as a startup expense, think of it as a startup investment in the business for what would be a little bit of money in the grand scheme of things to get it right, especially when there's more than one. Uh, you can save minimum 10x on the back end when there's a problem. And so we see a ton of, good friends and partners go 50-50, don't have a document, or literally do like legal Zoom or something. And then sadly, those those friends aren't friends several years into the business for any number of reasons. And if you have a 50-50 company and you don't have deadlock provisions or how to resolve that, you are going to end up more times than not in litigation, and litigation gets expensive. Litigation destroys relationships. There's a lot that can go in, to that that's not good. And the worst is, we see so many times the business suffers, right? It's the proverbial baby in the business divorce. And when mom and dad are fighting, no one's paying attention to the baby, it gets harmed, and now you got, employee morale goes down. You may lose customers because they're not getting the attention and service they want. So all kinds of bad things can happen. So it's that front end. Give some thought to a good legal partner that can get you formed and set up right, so that you can then go take advantage of all the opportunities you have plans for.
Yep. No, as an example, like we're working with one client right now. We're just talking initially about, a buyout, and one, 60% owner buying out a 40% owner. And we came up with, a price that we felt like was fair. And but I kept talking with the owner. I said, with the 60% owner that we represent, and I kept talking with him. I said, do you think that they're actually going to go for this price, right? Or do you think that there's other considerations that we should be considering? Because I don't want to create any bad will against you two, that you two have been partners for a long time. And, and the 6% owner said, nah, I think he's going to take this easy, that, he's going to agree to this. And then obviously we need to get legal involved and finalize things, et cetera, et cetera. And, we sent over, the proposed price, and already, it's a negotiation now, and the other party feels like, no, there's way more value here, that you need to pay me way more than that to buy me out. And it's like, yep, I mean, we're going through it, right? So even though you think, the other person, and what they're, what you think that they'll do, it's not always the truth, right? That, especially when it comes down to dollars and cents in regards to, those issues. So, so important to set it up correct, right? To think about, what does the divorce look like? That I hate for anybody to step into a marriage and think, hey, I'm thinking about divorce. Like, that to me is probably, you're setting yourself up for failure if that's the way that you think about marriage, right? And stepping in. But a business is not a marriage. We talk about it being somewhat like it, but at some point you're going to have an exit plan, right? And if you're not thinking about the end in mind at first, it's probably going to end up pretty messy at the end too.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. It's an uncomfortable conversation. I have it all the time. I bet I've had it 5 times in the last 2 weeks with people that we're working with. And I liken it to, I mean, it's basically an insurance policy. You hope you never need it, but if you do, you're going to be glad you have it. And the other analogy I use is kind of like having conversations with your life insurance broker, right? You're like, okay, you're dead. How are we going to take care of the rest of the family? I'm like,
Yep.
I don't really like this conversation,
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but Yeah, so you got to think through not just deadlock provisions, but valuation if you do want to buy the other out. First right of refusals, all kinds of things can come into play. And when you don't have those, you're stuck with a kind of an open negotiation. Uh, and I've seen it. I've seen you know companies that have documents that maybe deal with if one dies versus the other, but not if what if we just aren't getting along and want to buy you out, and it's literally silent. And you're stuck with making an approach, and as soon as you throw that number out, the other side's going to say, no, I want a little more. uh, and and then you start the dance, and can you agree maybe to a business appraiser or something to value the business and be stuck by that? If it's not in the document, good luck, right? Maybe the answer is maybe, but in the document, if you say, look, if we ever come to this, there's a process we've agreed we're going to follow. So anyway, so many things can be handled, and as I tell people, I'm not saying you're not going to be together forever in this business, but by chance, and by the way, we've seen family members, and we've seen like lifelong best friends, 8, 10 years, 15 years into a business, not get along anymore, and so it happens.
Yep. Yeah. You got to think about the worst in this, right? But I am interested, you've given us some advice in regards to, how somebody should especially go about setting up the business and thinking about the end in mind. But, a lot of our listeners, they're going to be thinking, I mean, they're growing businesses currently and they're working with customers, clients, et cetera. And many of the businesses that we work with are blue collar businesses, right? And, they're just grinding to get that next sale, to get that next project, to get that next job, et cetera. But what are things that you think are really relevant? Like, what are the top couple of things that you feel like they should be especially including in their client contracts, that they should be considering as to when I step into an agreement with a customer, that this should be in play, that, ideally wouldn't, push a customer away, but at the same time needs to really be considered for, the business owner. What would you say are some of those top things?
Great question. So yeah, I mean, it's everybody, we all are chasing, revenue, right? Drive revenue, manage expense to, be more profitable. And I think you're right. We get so hooked on, okay, I want this business. I need this business from this customer. But at the same time, you want to make sure you protect yourself, because just getting that deal doesn't mean it will be profitable unless you manage it right. So a number of things come to mind if a business owner is in that situation. Obviously pricing, right? First and foremost, how is pricing going to be set? How might it be adjusted? uh what kind of warranties or representations are you making, and are they accurate? Can you back them up? uh Limitations on liability, very important, right? To be thinking through, if something does go wrong, you know what are you agreeing to that is going to limit your ability to recover, but even more importantly, on the other side, right? If do you have to go after, have you agreed that that you're cutting off potential avenues of recovery for liability or not? And then indemnity provisions, what are those looking like? What kind of risk are you taking in providing indemnity or giving indemnity? And then finally, I think the termination provisions. You know, how and under what circumstance are you able to get out of the contract, or can the other side get out of the contract, right? And make sure you're comfortable and understand those provisions. Because we've seen all kinds of things, but I would tell those are the things people should be focusing on to say, can I live with this or not? Am I willing to take the risk in this domain or not? Or how much am I willing to take? So
Yeah, 100%. That as you're talking, especially the provision of liability and where liability is assigned, that it makes me think of, we work with a lot of fresh produce clients, fresh produce shippers, that their end customer is obviously an individual person that's going into the retail store and buying the product, but the actual customer is the retailer themselves. Like, that's the end buyer, but the actual customer is the retailer themselves. And so often, these Costco, Walmart, these their agreements, their master agreements say, yeah, you're liable for everything, including all food safety risk. And it's like, yeah, we can be liable if the source or the origination of the food safety risk does come from the farms and the packing house. But, once in your hands, a whole lot of people are touching that product when they go to buy it, right? How many hands have covered, that product? That's on you and your, your retail establishment at that point as to how you handled it. We can't be responsible for if somebody gets sick because, you spilled something on it and you tried to wash it off and still put it back on the retail shelf, right? So, I think making those clear boundary lines is so key as to you're not going to inherit all the risk. You're going to inherit for what you have control over, what you can actually influence, right? So, so important. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that's hard about the example you gave is when you're a small company, growing, and you get the opportunity, to be on the shelf of one of those big names. They have a lot more bargaining power, right? And so, a lot of times we're like, sorry, you want in or not? You got to take our terms or not? And so, but the key is, pushing. That's where you go. Okay, where do we think we can comfortably push to get a little more protection or not? And we always tell our clients it can't hurt to ask and to push a little bit, right? And so, but that is the ultimate challenge with the big retail names.
I feel like even based upon what you said though, right? I from my experience, having a good lawyer, having a good business attorney on your side as a part of, your advisory team, but then also having a really great insurance broker, or even if they directly underwrite it, having a really good insurance advisor on your side to where you could say, yeah, like, we may be pushing the boundaries or we may be accepting more risk because we really want this client account. But are there ways that you could, are there policies or, add-ons and clauses to the policy that you can add to make sure that if this actually does come up, we're still covered, right? And that somehow you've mitigated your risk across the board that, if you're accepting the risk from the other party, that can you still insure it in some way too, right? And I think I've always just felt like having somebody and having two really critical roles of having that, legal advice, but then having a great insurance broker, direct underwriter that really understands your business, and can understand those legal contracts too, and making sure that you're if you're not covered on one side, you're at least covered on the other, right?
Yeah, no, great point. I always say that a business owner needs a really strong circle of influence. So I think great attorney, great commercial insurance broker, CPA, banker. At least kind of that group to kind of make sure you are taken care of on all fronts.
I mean, it's sad too because I think that a lot of business owners hear this, but it really is true. You don't want to skimp on pricing on some of those. That sometimes they're so many business owners, like, at least we experienced that they went for the cheapest bookkeeping that they can get, and it's like, yeah, this is another one of these things that maybe as you started your business or for the first few years this was okay, but like we're working with a general contractor right now where what got you here isn't going to get you the next one, right? To get bonding, you're going to have good finances, and good financial reporting, and what you did, it doesn't work anymore. So now you're actually paying more for our help to get you into a good point, which I mean, sure, we can serve it, but it's just don't skimp on those things. That you want to make sure that, in any one of those relationships, that it's an advisor too, right? That it's not just somebody that's going to sell you a product or service, but it's a true advisor in all of those, right?
Absolutely. Couldn't
Yep.
agree more.
Um, you know, a lot of our audience, again, we target lower middle market businesses. So, that's kind of a broad definition, but generally we're talking about businesses less than 100 million in revenue. Um, when should these businesses consider forming a board, to provide governance? That, what's the right, like, what are the right trigger points that they should be considering that?
Yeah, yeah. In some respects, you could say, and I guess I would use it maybe different term between a kind of a governance board versus advisory board. And uh, I'm not so sure, depending on the level of sophistication, it couldn't hurt from the very beginning, at least to have some form of an advisory board of two or three people to bounce off of and get guidance from as you're starting and trying to grow. Um, as it comes to a more formal board, I don't know if there's really a key time because again, I think that guidance from people that have more experience is always a good thing. Uh, but I think as you get to the point where you see the opportunity, ability to scale is probably a good time to make sure that you've got guidance from people that have done it before, because we see this all the time. People grow and they grow too fast, and they run out of cash, or and they didn't think about that because they just all they saw was opportunity, and there might have been a better way to do it on a more uh, gradual basis to where they could keep up with it. And not that there's fixes for that, but all of a sudden you're going to a bank or someone to get a credit facility or something, try to maybe help augment that because you spent too much cash growing and don't have enough to kind of backfill because you're waiting on payment terms or whatever the case may be. So I think having a board to run that strategy by and get counsel and guidance when you're at that inflection point is a good thing to consider.
Yep, absolutely. What are what would you say are the real differences between an advisory board and governance board? Like, what's the real splitting differences between the two?
I think the main thing is just the fiduciary obligation, where if you actually create a board that has as you grow a fiduciary position uh, to the especially in a situation where there's owners or multiple owners, and versus advisory being a little less formal, uh, and just kind of maybe seeking counsel where it's maybe a collection of a couple of different mentors that you ask to kind of just serve on an advisory basis versus a formal board, would be the biggest difference to me.
What I mean, because this could be, for some of our business owners or listeners, like this could be an inflection point, right, where they're experiencing like, some of what we've talked about in regards to company formation documents, like, that was 10 years ago already for me, right? But now I'm thinking about the next steps, and setting up a board could certainly be a part of it, right? And so, what do you find are some of the best practices of really having a great board? Because I've been on boards where you see several board members where they show up to the board meetings, and they're just showing up to the board meetings, and they're sitting, and they're not providing a whole lot of feedback. You're presenting financials and everything to them, and they're just sitting there, right? And you're not getting as much value out of it. And especially for some governance positions, I've seen most of the board arrangements where they're paid positions, right? And so you want to make sure that you're getting value out of it. Like, what are your recommendations for really getting a good board in place?
So go back to the documents and make sure your organizational documents kind of set out the structure of the board, terms, the ways to add or remove. Roles and responsibilities are key, right? And then I think setting clear expectations of the role and then the why and what you're wanting to get out of board members. And in the smaller companies, I think you have the ability to have those conversations as you're you know building a board out. Um, and then it's having that however that board looks, and usually I guess the question becomes for the founder, if you will. Is the founder going to be a chair? Or are they going to trust someone else to chair the board? I think more times than not, you see the founder is probably starting out as a chair, but having the hard conversations if a board member's not pulling their weight, to have the hard conversation to say, hey, I mean, really appreciate your time, and I know we've been friends, but I really need you to show up. And if you can't, that's okay. But let me bring someone else in, right? And be willing to have that hard conversation and not wait for a 3-year term to expire or something.
Diversity is a very broad topic, right? But they talk about having a diverse board. Generally, what are your best practices for that? Because I certainly am one of diversity of thought is important, right? That I've experienced where too, like, having people outside of your industry can be really important because they bring different perspectives of how different industries work. That you just may be stuck in a way of thinking of this is how we've always done it, here. And I think it's always good to ask the question, but are there other things that you would consider to make sure that you're getting good thinkers and good thoughts into play?
I mean that's one of them is outside, different industries, right? Because you can learn so much, and there may be some similarities, but someone from a different industry could bring a thought in. You go, because yours get so focused on in your particular industry, you're like, I never thought of that. And so then the question is, how can we apply that? And that might make us different and a little more competitive in the market. Um, I think to the extent you could, depending on the business, right? But if you're, say, a manufacturer or supplier, maybe consider someone that spent most of their career being a consumer of your products, right? And so they can bring this is what I think your customer finds important and you should be thinking about. So another thing, to kind of bring that holistic view of all stakeholders, if you could bring in people from, you know, with experience from all your different stakeholders would form a board of diverse views. Uh, so that you're always kind of keeping all those things in mind as opposed to just being linear focused on just one thing.
I'd love to. We've talked about board and setting up a board and good ways or strategies to make sure you get value out of a board too. That I think it's, at least for me, it's important of having had experience on boards that for business owners that are considering it. I mean, we're some of our clients and our listeners, they're construction businesses that you have somebody that pulled themselves up by the bootstrap and may have never had board experience, right? And so I think it's a fallacy to think, oh, I just put smart people in play and, all of a sudden I have a good board. And it's even a board needs a little bit of managing too, right? I mean, you're chairman that, it needs a little bit of managing, even regardless of how high up that person is in their career and life, that still needs a bit of managing and set up appropriate. So I'm glad we could dive into that. But I'm going to let the previous California in me come out a little bit right now that for our audience, what's something that they should be considering in regards to their hiring practices from a legal mindset? That what are the top things that they should be considering to make sure that they're not setting themselves up in a bad way when hiring people?
Man, that's the key to the kingdom, right? So, from my perspective, it's your hiring should start with culture and, making sure that, one, you have to do that, you have to have clarity about who you are as a company and really what your culture, what defines your culture. And then as you start to interview, making sure that you're going to have fits within that. And that can be, everything from, and culture can mean so many things, but yes, we all got to get along, but do we share the same work ethic and work practices, right? And in these days, that now you're talking about, meeting someone as for an opening and, you're a company where you're all back in the office or mainly back in the office and you meet someone that wants fully hybrid. Well, that's not going to be a cultural fit, right? Even though they have the best skills potentially, because your culture is, we're in the office collaborating, working together, and you won't fit in and you won't develop relationships. And I think it's, being uh, very intentional about what works and the characteristics of successful people within your organization. What's the commonality? And then how do you interview and recruit for that? That's the key because if you can, the better you get at that, the chances of making good decisions go up so that you don't have to worry about when you made the bad decision and you get into the termination side of that. So that's what we try to do here. Uh, we're trying to get better at it every day. We're in the process right now of kind of revamping our recruiting process to learn from prior mistakes and really hone in on those types of things so that you know we get a better we do a better job of learning about the candidate and how they might fit. The next piece, to the extent you can do it, is how can you simulate the role that they're going to be in. And I think there's a lot that's been written and talked about that in recent years about whatever that may be. But you get a better look at how that person's going to behave once they're actually on board in your organization.
A big topic that is a theme today too is AI. And I mean, even for myself as a business owner, it's like where do I plug in AI? I'm so unaware personally of all the use cases of it and how it can be used for business. But one of the things that scares me out there, I keep hearing these stories where it's like once you've put information in ChatGPT, I've heard of the idea that it lives there forever. So like, especially on the finance side, so many people are trying to figure out like, how can we have AI models, produce better financials, et cetera. And it's like, yeah, but once you put that data in, it's there. And I don't know that you really want it there, right? That potentially is not your data. I mean, it's your data living elsewhere now. And, you know, for businesses that are wanting to really consider use cases around AI, what would you say are things that they need to make sure are mitigated from a legal standpoint to make sure that they're safe?
Yeah, so I think it kind of, depending on the business, like certainly if you're a business that, I think that all businesses have some form of customer, but if you're dealing with customers, they get to be very careful not to put customer information in any kind of open AI type of format, right? So you should be protecting that customer information, which means you probably need to be looking at developing a policy around the use of AI in your organization. Uh, and certainly a lawyer can help you with that, but you're going to want some software AI type experts to collaborate, I think, to get it right. Uh, we did something like that last year, and it forbids any kind of use of the chat GPT or anything in the office for without specific approvals, because especially with our client information, we just can't do that. Uh, we're fortunate, I guess, in the legal side. Thompson and Reuters has uh, where we've done legal research inside databases. They've come up with some AI tools, but they live inside their secure database. Uh, so there's some safety there and known protections and security that we can use some of those AI tools inside of that database. But it just, in general, using it, I think companies should be careful about that and how employees use it. And for me, it comes down to education and training, and that get the right people, consultants or whatever, to come in and educate and train your people. And from there, I think you can start forming some policies that will work for your organization, and your people will know what's okay, what's not, when to stop and ask a question or get permission, versus just going rogue. Then look, at home, if they want to use it on their home computer and plan their next vacation, you know, more power to you. But at the office, I think you have to be cautious and careful first. And yes, find ways that you can leverage it because it can make you more efficient.
Everything you said is so good. I think, how do I say though, I get the feeling like this is a dynamic thing, right? That especially in today's environment, like it's not just that you set a policy in place and it's good for the next 5 years with how fast, this AI technology is moving. Because I'm just surprised, like even amongst our own team, it's like all of a sudden they show like, oh yeah, AI can do this. I'm like, I had no idea that it could do that. That was a potential use case that, and then you have to beg the question, is should we be doing that given the circumstances, right? But I think, like you said, like I kind of like that as to, you know, generally it's not to be used in these categories. If you have a question, we have to have an approval process, right? And I think that that's a general broad framework that can work well. But yeah, I just how fast it's moving. I hate to say that you probably, you tell me, but it feels like you probably need to revisit that policy every once in a while, because it is dynamic. It's moving fast.
100%. So we actually have a little standing committee, and that's either the AI's, so within our strategic plan, uh, we have one team kind of looking at processes and things as a business that can help us be more efficient, profitable, et cetera, and how we run the business. There's an AI subcommittee as part of that. Uh, we put this policy that I mentioned in place last year. I think through the course of the year, it was revised at least 2 or 3 times because it changes. So they're staying on their charge with staying on top of that and seeing how that affects the current policy and whether tweaks need to be made. And when they are, then it's communicated company wide to everyone what the change is and why, et cetera. But yeah, it's changing at rapid pace, right?
I think, we're kind of getting to, our close here pretty soon. I'd love for our audience to know, because I find it even in like financial solutions, and I don't know if you have the same experience on the legal side, but what a business needs at particular intervals of their life cycle is different, right? That like we say, like a lot of businesses below 5 to 10 million in revenue, like they don't even need a fractional CFO, quite honestly, unless it's on a very project basis. But that's not a role that needs to be filled on a continuous basis for their business. And really we advise them like, hey, accounting, bookkeeping is make that sure that that's solid, because then you have something to build upon. But as businesses kind of move in a lower middle market, like what got them there is not necessarily what is going to get into the next stage. And so from a legal advice standpoint or selecting a business attorney, what do you find are the best practices or the things that they should be considering to make sure that they get the right advisor for them from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, so I think as they grow from just a operating kind of as a one man shop or you know small business, although we work with a lot of startups. For me, it starts with is it who you're hiring as an attorney taking time to understand your business and kind of the drivers of your business so they can figure out where they can add more value to you. Uh, I think you want someone that has true business experience and some broad experience. And one of the values we think we bring to the table is a deep bench, right? So you can get someone like me or a senior partner here that has a lot of experience and has seen a lot of things and can issue spot pretty quickly, but then say, and here's a resource within our firm that has that expertise to help you on that issue. Uh, that's immense value as opposed to, you know, the solo that maybe doesn't have the experience, but tries to do it anyway. And so, really, as that company starts to grow, really and get more settled into some meaningful vendor or customer relationships, I think that's when you start looking to, okay, this is going to be a meaningful part of my business. I need to make sure this contract's right. That's probably a good indication that you need to find someone that's seen and done that a lot.
Now we get to the part of the episode, Chris, that you provided some really wonderful advice for our listeners here of, in a broad sense, what to consider. I love that, but we also like to get to know you a little bit here too, right? We like to have a little fun. So for any one of our guests, we started to do this rapid fire fun question deal here. So first thing that hits the brain, this is what we want to look to. So what is the best legal advice you've ever received?
uh, the best legal advice I've ever seen is that a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client.
Yeah, that's a good takeaway. What I mean, your BoyarMiller is focused, from business legal advice. So, for our audience to understand, there's no criminal activity here, or those types of things. But I am really interested from a business standpoint. What is the most unusual or unexpected case that you've ever personally worked on?
Man, there's a lot. I drawn on a lot of years' experience. There's been some crazy ones. I'm trying to think, the one that comes to mind. I don't know how PG it is, but there was a situation where uh, it was a business dispute, but in the course of that business dispute, what came out, and it was kind of a family business, that one of the principals, because there was issues of waste and money, etc. uh, who was married, had a girlfriend on the side, but had that girlfriend, he had written out or she had him write out kind of we called it the contract for sex. And it was a contract that he would pay for her apartment, he would pay for a car, he'd get like so many visits a week, and they signed this thing. And yeah, that was probably the most bizarre thing I didn't expect to see, but dealt with. So
Oh wow.
how about
Oh
that
wow.
one?
Yeah, that's wild. That I'm sure we've seen the same thing that is once you ever undercover the finances or once you kind of get deep, all of a sudden you really get to know business owners for who they are, right? So
Yeah.
that's
These
an
people are
interesting one. Oh,
that wasn't my client, it was the other guy. So we had fun using that against him.
yes.
Uh,
Um, if you weren't a lawyer, what career would you have pursued?
I think I'd been a football coach.
There you go. Yeah. Who's your team? Is it SMU in college football, or do you have
Oh,
another
for
team?
sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a Mustang, and I would say then at that point I kind of root for the state of Texas.
Yep.
I want to see the Texas schools do well, uh, and on the NFL side, back in the days of Roger Staubach and Tom Landry, I was a Cowboys fan, but since the Houston Texans came to town, I'm a hometown Texans. So
Fair enough. Yep. Yeah. Fair enough. Do you like baseball? Yesterday was opening day for Astros, so you a baseball fan too?
absolutely
Awesome.
big baseball fan, big Astros fan, and I watched the game yesterday. So
Yep.
have enjoyed the last 8 9 years of being an
Yeah.
Astros fan for sure, but
It's been good.
also grew up an Astros fan, so the days of going to the Dome and watching Nolan Ryan and
Yep.
all those guys were fun memories as well.
Yeah, yeah. It was. I had a client text me yesterday. I was calling him, and he's closer to LA, and so he sent a picture and said, "I'm not taking your call for this reason." It was him and his wife at Dodger Stadium, on opening day, and I sent him a picture back of my Astros shirt that day and said, we're competitive at this point. That I don't know if I can keep you as a client. So
Yeah. I love it that, being from California, you've converted to an Astros fan.
yes, yeah. I mean, well, my house was always divided. It was a little bit tough to, be a fan of particularly something because my dad was from Southern California, so Dodgers, and then my mom was from Northern California, so Giants. So I never really grew up with a strict allegiance, in regards to baseball, and grew up playing baseball and all that. Just never grew up with a strict allegiance to it. So to either one of those teams. So and I don't know. It's hard to be a Dodgers fan. I feel like, as I guess if you can pay for a lot of things, then you're happy with that. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's got Dodgers and the Yankees, right? They
yep,
just they're to me they're more times than not they're a great example. They're just throwing money at a problem. It's not going to fix it.
yes, very much so. That, yeah, very very much so. So, Chris, Boyer Miller. I mean, I'm so grateful to have you on here, but obviously Boyer Miller is a good sizable firm that can serve a lot of clients. I'm interested to understand for our audience, where can they figure out more about you, but where can they figure out more about Boyer Miller as well?
For sure. Both at our website, BoyarMiller.com. It's BOYAR Miller.com. And what I tell people all the time, Mason, is the easiest way to think about our firm is that 90 to 95% of the day in, day out legal needs of any business in any industry is what we do. Yeah, we work with business owners and entrepreneurs of all sizes at all stages of their business journey and kind of serve as their legal partner throughout. So, yeah, so our website's the best way to learn more about us and about me. So,
Great. And yeah, a little plug too that obviously Chris has his own podcast that I was on a couple of weeks ago. So, Building Texas Business, that, yeah, if anybody wants to listen to a good podcast on, interviewing Texas business owners, Chris runs that as well. So,
well,
uh,
I appreciate that plug
yep,
and your episode. Yeah, it got dropped on Wednesday and it's trending well. And
yep.
appreciate the time you took to share your views on that.
No, awesome. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for being here. This is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for the advice that you gave to our audience as well, that hopefully our audience will appreciate these takeaways on these next steps of the business that they're growing. So really appreciate you.
Well, appreciate the opportunity and look forward to seeing you soon.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.